Assalamu alaikum, guys. I hope everyone is well. Just going to do another live dawah Q&A, inshallah. So as you guys join, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, inshallah. Before you guys, as you guys are sending in your questions, something I wanted to quickly share was I came across a very interesting video on YouTube earlier today. It was titled "The Meaning of Life." According to hunter and gatherers or something along those lines. And I thought that was really interesting because, we never hear the perspective. We always think about the perspectives of Walaikum Salam to everyone that's joining. We always hear the perspectives of people that live, comfortable lives, that have pretty much, things worked out, the basic needs met. So it was a really interesting video, and the guy that was interviewing these hunter and gatherers, and he asked them, and these are a tribe, I think, somewhere in Africa, and they live like people lived thousands of years ago. So they don't have any of the amenities that we have. They have nothing to do with the modern world. They are, or even the pre-modern world. They live, in the jungles, and they gather their food, and they hunt, and they eat, and that's how simple their life is. And he asked them, what the meaning of life was, or what was the most important thing in life. And it's really interesting, the answer the person gave. He basically said, and they don't even have a well formulated language, these people, like they use clicks and sounds to communicate with each other. And the answer he gave was, the most important thing in life, or you can say the meaning of life according to this person, because I don't think the question was phrased too well. But what the answer this person gave was, it's meat and honey, basically. So that's the most important thing in their life, and what was really sort of hit me was the way he communicated this. I mean, you could see it. He actually meant this. And it just got me thinking, subhanAllah, there's people in the world even today for who it's a struggle to get even the most basic things like food, and water. And they have to go, these people, they actually go hunting for food every day. So they don't know, like they don't have things stocked up or food, in their houses, or let alone fridges and freezers and stuff like this. So, they say, he said meat and honey. And he asked, and he had a follow-up question later. He said, what was the most happiest moment of your life, or the most happiest day of your life? He said, when we had meat and honey. So it just got me thinking, subhanAllah, these people, they cherish and consider to be the most important, the very things that we take for granted today. None of us, I mean, how many times do we think about or worry about food or having water? These are, we don't even worry about having a proper internet connection these days. Yeah, but these people, they didn't have even the most basic things, and for them these things were precious. And for us, I mean, we don't even acknowledge these things anymore, let alone sit there and be grateful for the stuff that we have. Because at the end of the day, the food that we have, the water that we have, all of these basic needs, the fact that they're met, it's a gift. I mean, it's a gift from Allah. We don't earn it, we don't own it, but we're not grateful for it. So it's something to really think about, subhanAllah, and there's something that we will be. I mean, I can't see why you won't be questioned about these things. About, were you grateful when you had food and water and all of these things? So it's good to think about these things, even the most basic things that we take for granted today, and just take a moment to be grateful for them, inshallah. So that being said, we're going to do a Q&A, inshallah, today. So if you guys have any questions, please do write them down, or in the chat section, and inshallah we'll try to address them. Wa alaikum salam to everyone that's joined. Wa alaikum salam. Dawah Digital says, I need a better camera and mic. Absolutely, bro. So we're going to, inshallah, try to step things up. And Dawah Digital is going to be helping us with this, inshallah. He's going to be lending me his camera, inshallah, one of his many cameras, mashallah, that he has. Say alhamdulillah, bro. You should be really grateful for the fact that you have so much technology, mashallah, man. So yeah. Sam, brother, what do you think about Just Six Numbers by Martin Rees? Amazing book. I haven't read it, so let me know if it's good. I would definitely probably at some point check it out, inshallah. So, brother Akib says, if we find our life in threat for giving da'wah, do we have the option to stop doing da'wah but continue doing good deeds? Yeah, I mean, we have to be sensible with this because when it comes to giving da'wah, there's a whole discussion. We don't need to get into it here, but amongst the scholars, whether it's an obligation upon the individual or whether it's an obligation upon a group of individuals in a given community. So you know it's not like your salah, for example, right? So you need to, or it's not considered like that by many. So you have to be sensible. And obviously, if you're in a life-threatening situation, then giving da'wah, at least as we understand it or we see it, which is through, da'wah tables and public da'wah and, in front of people, putting yourself out there, don't do that. That's not to say there's no other means of giving da'wah. You can give da'wah to your family members, to your local friends, and even if you can't do that, well, try online. If you can't do that, then resort to just leading a good example for the community. You have to. It's not a hard and fast, thing where you have to put yourself out there, even if your life is no. You have to be careful. And if you can't give da'wah, then yeah, just do what you can. Inshallah, that's all that's required of us. What do we do um, in the situation that we find ourselves in, and how do we make the most of that situation? That's it. No, that's what's required of us. We don't have to. You don't have to do things which will put you at risk in any way, shape, or form. Inshallah. How is Dr. Craig's morality and Islamic morality different? I haven't looked into morality, Craig's argument for morality, his ideas on morality from a Christian perspective, but I have looked into, to a degree, his um, the way he addresses the problem of evil and suffering. So I know it's a different thing. So I won't be able to comment on morality, um, although I don't see it being much different. So at least um, from a logical perspective, when if he were to present an argument for morality, because I assume his argument will also revolve around the idea of God, um, and God being the anchor for objective moral values and duties. So I don't see it being much different, although there may be some differences, but I think it'll be very similar. Craig, by the way, William Lane Craig, if you don't know, he has taken many of his arguments from the Islamic tradition itself. So, for example, the argument that he makes, the Kalam cosmological argument, is an Islamic argument, meaning that it comes from Muslims originally, that he um, has taken and maybe adapted from his perspective. And that's not to say Christians haven't given arguments throughout history, or had novel ideas or arguments for themselves. There's many. But I think Craig's morality argument, I don't recall reading it any recently, but as far as I'm aware, it's very similar, and I would assume it to be similar as well. So hopefully that answers that question. So Harid Khalid says, isn't it unfair that we're born as Muslim and have an advantage over others that we have been told from the beginning to act upon Islam? I don't think that specifically may be an advantage. You can see it as an advantage the fact that you're given an early start, that you have an opportunity, or you're informed about Islam early on. But I don't think it puts a born Muslim in a better position in the grand scheme of things. And what I mean by this is, throughout life, it's not the case that born Muslims remain on Islam throughout their life 100% of the time and they die upon Islam. It doesn't work like that. How many examples do we know of Muslims who leave Islam? Um, how many examples do we see of non-Muslims that accept Islam and embrace Islam later on in their life, who have nothing, or whose families have nothing to do with Islam? So I don't think it's an advantage in the grand scheme of things, because life unfolds in a different way. Everyone gets the opportunities. Allah gives opportunities to every single person, whether you're born Muslim or not. And so at the end of the day, it's not an advantage, overall advantage. Although you can say it's an advantage from the perspective, at least the born Muslims get, some of them at least get the message of Islam early on in their life. Now, whether they choose to accept it, adhere to it, remain on it, it's a totally different question. And that is not the case. It doesn't happen like that. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, Allah is the most just, and therefore, He will do justice amongst His creation. And we can assume that, especially for guidance, because that's the most important thing for the human being, guidance which will lead to success in this life and the hereafter. So Allah is going to present opportunities for every single human being throughout their life, whether they're born into a Muslim family or not. And those that never receive the message of Islam, Allah does. It's not, they don't get sent to the hellfire. If they never receive the message of Islam, or they don't, even according to some scholars, they don't receive the clear message of Islam without any adulteration or distortion, then they will be tested on the Day of Judgment. So Allah is the most just, and we need to keep this in mind, inshallah. And that's why I mentioned this in the last stream as well, is that whenever we have such questions or ideas in our mind, always go back to the foundation. What do we know about Allah? We know Allah is the most just. Okay, just understanding this, that Allah is the most just. And remember, Allah's justice is unlike the justice of anything created. It's beyond comparison. It's perfect. So if that's the case, then everyone's in good hands. Sure, everyone's life will unfold differently and different, go through different phases, and everyone's opportunities will be different. The signs every human being receives will be different. But in the grand scheme of things, ultimate justice will be done. So, it's coming back to your point. I don't think it's unfair. Although it should be something that we recognize, and if we do recognize, we should be grateful for and make the most of. So, Akib, I think I've answered your question earlier, bro. What is your thought on new Dragon Man fossil? I haven't come across it, subhanAllah. So I haven't. I will definitely check it out. If you have any links, please do share them. But I haven't come across any Dragon Man fossil. It is interesting, but what's really interesting is they found fossils, or really strange fossils sometimes, and not that they're complete fossils, but whatever they find, there's some really strange things they find, and sometimes those things that scientists and archaeologists find don't fit into the mainstream narrative that's out there in regards to human beings and how human beings have gotten to the place where we come from, our origins. So what they do with that evidence is another question. But it will be definitely interesting to check this out, inshallah. So please do share whatever you have. Yeah, Hakim, I don't know, bro. I haven't read the book, Just Six Numbers by Martin Rees. Do let me know if it's good, inshallah. So Rosh Bhatt says, please debate Hari Sultan for the fans, man. Yeah, so bro, look, I mentioned this before. I don't think he's worth debating. I really don't think it's worth debating. I think people have, discussed things with them, debated with them. I think Hamza Ali Abbasi had a discussion with him as well, and I think it was sufficient, bro, to sort of clarify his misconceptions and sort of give him some doubt. But you got to remember, these certain individuals on YouTube, they for whatever reason they're there. There's enough information out there in videos by Muslims for them to to better inform these individuals. So he doesn't. From what I've seen of him, I haven't seen much about his stuff, but from what I've seen, there's a few things that come across. One, he's extremely misinformed, although there are some really good resources for him online already. And secondly, he just seems to have an agenda like most atheists do online. So um, I don't think it's worth spending any more time because he has had his fair share of discussions, and there is enough information out there for him to sort of check out himself, inshallah. So recently, I reacted to all my other questions. All bad about that. Sorry, I did. Hakim, I don't know if there's any other questions you had, bro. If you wanted to ask, please do put them down, inshallah. When's your next debate, races? I don't know. There's nothing planned. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm not really into debates. It's not my it's not something I'm into. The debate I did have with that teacher, I don't remember his name now, subhanAllah. It wasn't planned. It just was given. Alhamdulillah, it was given to me because the individual that was supposed to debate him couldn't debate him then. And yeah, so it just if any debates do come up, or if I feel it's something I want to do, I want to engage in, I probably, depending on the situation, depending on the individual, I'll probably consider it then. But generally speaking, I'm not looking for debates. I don't think they're really fruitful. There's a place for debates, definitely, and I think there are people that are far better trained to debate than myself. And mashallah, there have been some brilliant debates. Like Hamza's had some brilliant debates. Hijab has had some brilliant debates. So yeah, if it ever does come up, I'll definitely consider it, but not something I'm looking for. So Pranav says, Quran says in chapter 9 that the polytheists will burn in hellfire. Does this apply to people who have never heard of Islam, or does it only apply to people who have been exposed to Islam? That's a very good question. I did touch upon it earlier. The thing we need to understand is, again, going back to the point, always look at the fundamentals. What do we know about Allah? Allah is the most just, Allah is the most merciful. People who haven't, assume there are people who have never come across the message of Islam. They've never heard the message of Islam in their life. They will not be immediately put into the hellfire. Allah will deal with them on the day of judgment. This may take the form of a test, and they will be tested, and then it will be determined as to where they end up. What this applies to, such ayat, is people who have received. Remember, the polytheists in Mecca were people who had received the message of Islam from the Prophet ﷺ himself. You're not going to get anyone better who can convey the truth and articulate the truth with more clarity other than the Prophet ﷺ. So these people, Hujjah was established upon them. There was no excuse, for them to reject the truth once it had come to them, when the messenger was present amongst them. So their end is clear. But as for if they die upon that state, that is. But as for those who don't hear the message of Islam, or even, like I said earlier, receive a distorted message, Allah subhanahu Allah will test them. They would face a situation on the day of judgment whereby it will be determined as to where they end up. Okay, so 84 says, does Allah send people clear-cut signs of His existence, possibly even divine signs? Well, I don't know. See, I think clear-cut needs to be defined. Allah sends signs, right? They're clear signs, absolutely. But if we mean by clear-cut signs, some sort of physical occurrence, meaning like you see a flash from the sky, or something coming down, or something like this, the type of signs or evidences that most empiricists or empirically driven atheists ask for, then no, right? Allah will give you sufficient signs. If you are to really honestly think about them and reflect upon them, they could be in the form of personal signs that every human receives time to time, and they could be in the form of signs, or that we see in the world around us, within the heavens and the earth, within the universe. There's enough there, plus the fitrah of the human being. There is enough there for an honest, sincere person to come to the true conclusion. But Allah is not going to spoon feed people, right? Because if that was to be the case, then it defeats the purpose of this life. It defeats the test. And Allah mentions this in the Quran. Because some of the polytheists, the Arabs would ask for, why haven't angels been sent down to the Prophet? You know, uh, yeah, Allah says if we had made that happen, then that's it. Game over. The whole objective here is that we're being tested, and a big part of that test is to see whether we can use all of the faculties and abilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us as human beings, and whether we can use them to ponder and to reflect and to observe, using the senses He's given us, using the abilities He's given us, the faculties, to see if we can find our Creator, if we can acknowledge Him. And that's a part of our test. That's probably the most fundamental part of the test. That's where it begins. Do we recognize our Creator? So yes, so clear signs, absolutely. The Quran is a clear sign. It's a clear-cut sign. It's a miracle, we would say, from many perspectives. But there is still going to be an element of where the human being has to make the effort, the intellectual effort, the sort of rational effort, even an internal effort. Can they be honest? Can they be sincere? Can they put things in place within them where they're not sort of deliberately turning away from something because it doesn't suit them? That's the effort we need to make. That's the struggle we need to engage in. So there is always those two elements that come together in this life. So yeah, Allah does. So based on what I've said, to summarize the answer to that question, Allah absolutely gives clear signs to every single human being, and they come in the form of personal signs, and they come in the form of signs that surround us. Now it's up to us whether we're going to do that little bit of work that's required from our end to connect the dots and to acknowledge our Creator. What's the topic? It's open, inshallah. So any dawah related topic you guys can ask, inshallah, or dawah related question. Sarah B, really sorry if I refer to you as a brother. So this comes up quite a lot. ITZ says, what's your response to the dilemma of the rock when they say that God is omnipotent? Can He create a rock that He cannot carry? Yeah, so I like the way Hamza addresses this question. And one thing he points out is that if you really study this question, as you guys can see on the screen, it's a self-contradictory statement. It's not really a question. I mean, just because you stick a question mark at the end of this statement, it doesn't make it a question, right? It contradicts itself. On one end, in one part of this supposed question, you're saying, you're referring to God as all-powerful, omnipotent. And then in the latter part of the sentence, the supposed question, in the statement, more accurately, you're saying a negative, that He cannot do something. So it's a contradiction. It's a paradox. It's self-refuting, this whole idea, the statement itself. So it's not really a question, and it's absurd. And Hamza provides a very funny answer, or a silly answer to a silly quote unquote question. He says, well, if you were to answer this question, not that we should, and not that it's befitting to refer to Allah in such ways, but just to hopefully in some cases get the questioner to realize the folly of the question, is to say, well, yeah, God can create a rock so heavy that He cannot move, and then He can move it, right? So it's a silly answer to a silly question. So yeah, it's basically not a question. It's just a silly statement. Truth Lover says, if there is a famine somewhere, will it rain by praying? I'm going to answer this not specifically, but generally. because I think this touches upon a very important point in regards to prayer and supplication, and the concept of prayer and supplication. He says, if there is a famine, so look, essentially what we're getting at is, if we pray for something, will it be answered? Okay. Now, the direct answer to that question is yes. Allah answers all prayers. If we supplicate to Allah, He answers all prayers. However, what needs to be understood is, how is that prayer answered? Now, we know, according to the prophetic tradition, that, you know, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not give you what you have asked for, right? But may save something for you in the hereafter for your supplication. And He may not give it to you because the thing you've asked for may actually not be good for you. It may be detrimental for you, although you may not be able to see it. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will delay giving you what you've asked for, because maybe beyond our knowledge, there is a reason for you to receive what you want at a later date, or a benefit, something that thing will be more beneficial to you if you were to receive it at a later date than receive it when you want it, right? Sometimes Allah will delay it because He wants you to supplicate to Him, because when you're supplicating to Allah, you're worshipping Allah. It's a part of worship, and you're being rewarded. Each time you supplicate, you are being rewarded, because you're acknowledging the fact that you're supplicating, making dua to Allah. The very act signifies that you've acknowledged Allah is your creator, Allah is your Rabb, Allah is your sustainer. He is the one that can provide for you, and that acknowledgement is rewarded. You know, that is a part of our worship. And so there are many reasons as to why, you know, sometimes Allah will remove a calamity from your way, from your path, you know, instead. So that supplication, you may have wanted something, but you may not receive it immediately in your life right now when you asked for it. But as a result, Allah will remove some sort of calamity from it. You know, so we have to remember that sometimes we want things which we believe are good for us, but they're not really good for us. You know, sometimes it could even be the case that sometimes you may be going through something difficult and you supplicate to Allah to remove you from this difficulty. But Allah may not answer that immediately, because maybe there is wisdom behind you going through that difficulty at that point. Maybe there's something for you to learn, something for you to acquire from that situation, which you wouldn't if you were removed from that situation. And these are things that are beyond us as human beings, right? We don't know the unseen. We don't have access to the future. Allah does. Allah knows everything. And therefore, the short answer is yes, every single supplication is answered, but how it's answered and when it's answered is in line with the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that's how we have to understand supplication, right? So this whole sort of shallow idea, or some atheists put out there, you know, about quotes, you know, even sometimes quoting some research, oh, prayers are ineffective and they're not answered, is because they have a very superficial understanding of supplication. You know, it's deeper than that. It's not just a case of you demand or ask from God and God gives you immediately. No, you know, Allah will give it to you, may give it to you in this life, you may receive it thereafter, you may receive it later, but there is always wisdom behind this, and Allah will allow for you to have what you need as opposed to what you may want. You know, we may confuse sometimes our needs and wants, but Allah knows us better than we know ourselves. So, you know, it will happen in the best way. And the greatest thing to understand is that supplication is worship. Make dua to Allah for everything, you know, or whatever you need, you know. And it takes time, because there's an element now. There's a human element here as well, which is how do you put it? There's this selfish side of the human being. There's this greedy side of the human being, which just wants, you know, give it to me, I just want it now. If you don't give it to me, then I don't believe in you, or I don't think you know what's good for me. These ideas stem from agitation of the self, right? Not from what's actually real. So and that's something, again, we have to struggle with. And we have to realize our Creator knows us best. If He answers a prayer, and sometimes He will give you what you want. You know, you pray for it and you will get it. You know, but if that doesn't happen, then realize there's a lot more going on than just your prayers not being answered. So Brother Usman is asking for a good introductory book by Imam al-Ghazali. Thanks. Um, I don't know about an introductory book, bro, but there are some brilliant books by Imam al-Ghazali, and many of them have been translated as well. One of my personal favorites that I just love, and I think it's one of the best books you can read for yourself, is A Letter to a Disciple. It's phenomenal. SubhanAllah. It's short. It's a couple of pages, literally. You can get a really nice printed copy of it with parallel Arabic English translation. It's a phenomenal book. A Letter to a Disciple. Definitely read that. Then the Ihya as well. You can get, which is his big collection of on religious sciences. There's a condensed version of this, a sort of summarized version you can get as well. It's I don't remember the exact title of that, who's translated it top of my head, but it's an orange covered book. So it's the abridged Ihya. That's another really good book you can have for yourself. So, and then there's many other books that you can that you can read. But for me personally, the A Letter to a Disciple is probably one of my favorites. So definitely, I'll definitely recommend everyone to read that, inshallah. So let's see. ITZ says, what is your response when an atheist comes to you and says, I searched books and passages for evidence of the existence of God, but I was not convinced, and I searched for Islam and was not convinced? If someone comes to me and says that, I would probably ask them, I'd probably ask them a bit more information. So when you say you searched books, okay, what does that mean? When you searched Islam, okay, what does that mean? So I would try to understand what they're saying when they say this, because you can't generalize this. Many people could make this statement, but what they mean by it would be totally different, each individual. For someone searching, they may just be they went to an anti-Islamic website and read a passage on, verses of the Quran or something like this, or where someone tried to debunk the existence of Islam or the truth of Islam on some website. For another person, maybe they may have read the entire Quran. So it's different. It's relative to each individual. But I would really inquire about what they mean by that they searched, and after that, try to really get to the bottom of what they consider as evidence, because this is another very big thing. Again, people ask for evidence, and language could be quite deceiving sometimes. The way people speak or what they say, and it requires further investigation. So if someone is not convinced by what they've read, and if they have actually read properly, then it may be a case that they may have a certain conception of evidence which they're misapplying to the question of God. Because you can't, it's known that you can't apply the same standards of evidence for every single thing, or you can't apply the same tools of inquiry for everything. So things that are physical, when it comes to material things, worldly things, okay, science is a good way to go. The empirical method is a good way to go. When it comes to morals and ethics, well, no, science is amoral. Science is not the way to go. You have to look elsewhere. When it comes to, you may have to look into, for example, philosophy, etc. Right? When it comes to the question of God, again, the question of God or evidence for God is beyond the scope of the scientific method. You have to look elsewhere. And there are many routes to knowledge. There are many ways to try and arrive at truth. Now, if you're caught up on this idea that the empirical method is the only way to truth, and you're going in with this assumption, you're never gonna find sufficient proof, right? So you're never gonna be convinced, no matter how many times you read the Quran, or no matter how many arguments you study, because what you're looking for, it's impossible to find in this realm. So it's important to inquire about this. When you get these two pieces of information, it'll be much easier to address this individual, inshallah, these types of people, whoever asked this question. So guys, I'm just StreamYard always seems to do this. It skips jumps for some reason. Okay, I'm just gonna go back up to. See if that's it. So Akhi Khan says, what is the best way to deal with people who are extremely skeptical? For example, when they're arguing with chance argument possibilities. I don't think if people are so okay, let's take a scenario. Say you speak to someone who you've presented an argument to, say the design argument, and they're resorting to the chance hypothesis. They think, well, there's still a chance, right? Although it may be very unlikely, and they're not really employing common sense as they would in other parts of their life, or other spheres of their life. Such people, I wouldn't call them skeptical. I think this is not skepticism. This is beyond skepticism. There is something else that's going on. There is a resistance. These are resistant people. Why that resistance is there towards the idea of God, acknowledging God, maybe for many different reasons, and maybe for certain emotional reasons, experiences they've had in their life, etc., etc. So, how would you deal with people that are resistant? Is try to figure out why they're resistant and then address that. So, if they've had a negative, traumatic experience in their life, whereby they have concluded based on that experience that it's God's to blame, and therefore they've developed this negative association with God in their mind, but then this negative idea of God in their mind. Then it's important to address that situation and reconnect the dots that they've connected in the wrong way, and that normally seems to help such situations, because it's really important to understand people in the da'wah. It's not just a case of, a lot of times, let's put it this way, we as human beings, although we may come across as if we're rational, and a discussion on the surface may seem like it's on a rational playing field, many times what's actually bolstering up and keeping up that rational discussion, there are loads of underlying foundations and assumptions. And in many cases, it's emotional. So it's really important to understand those foundational issues and problems, and to address those. And if you can, inshallah, because I think we mislabel people sometimes. If someone is resisting and going to the chance hypotheses and all of this type of stuff, and is willing to believe something absolutely ridiculous, as opposed to God, to just to do away with the idea of God, that isn't someone that's just skeptical. I don't think that's doing justice to the word skeptical. That's someone that's just resistant and doesn't want to acknowledge God. So we have to figure out why they're being resistant, inshallah. Okay, I think I've skipped a few. Okay. So Saint says, can you please help explain the concept of morality being external to scripture? I assume what you mean by this is that there is an innate sense of morality in human beings. What I mean by this is that human beings have an innate understanding of, so at least a basic understanding of right and wrong, good and bad. So how we explain this? Well, let's put it this way. I think there's enough evidence for the fact that human beings have a basic understanding of what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. Although that's limited, we see this being expressed in human experience. Human beings are always inclined towards doing good, although they may not have a foundation for it, and refrain from doing or turning towards doing what's bad. And even if they engage in bad, there's a sense of guilt, and they have this sense of, they've done something wrong. I think human experience itself is enough evidence that there is an inbuilt understanding. There is, you can refer to as part of the essence of the human being, or the fitrah from an Islamic perspective, that there is this basic understanding. And Allah tells us this in the Quran, that He inspired the soul with its good and bad in Surah Shams. So I think human experience is sufficient evidence of that. That so fitri understanding of right and wrong. although in the times that we live in, it's becoming more and more clouded, slowly and steadily. And what Islam does is it reinforces that innate truth, and it expounds upon it more specifically and gives us specific guidelines, which are in line with the fitrah. And that's why when we read the Quran and when it tells us to do something and not to do something, it makes sense. And it's hard to explain. It makes sense innately. You don't have to reason it. It's like you get this feeling that it's right or this is wrong, So although that shouldn't be a gauge when it comes to the Quran, but it is something which is it's something that's reassuring, to the human being. So yeah, that's what I'd say in regards to that. I mean, Psalm 21 to your dua. So Tashhaf Khan says, how do you maintain concentration in namaz, in salah? Okay, this is something we all struggle with time to time. It's very difficult, and including myself. I really sometimes have struggled with salah because look, it's quite natural. It's something you do. When you do things regularly on a daily basis, they become habitual, second nature. So you don't really, and normally things that are second nature in life, you don't really pay attention to much. Because you just do them. Even when we're eating, sometimes you may have your lunch or dinner and you may not realize you eaten, or how long it took you to eat. You may even forget 15 minutes later what you ate. Because it's something habitual, something we do regularly. And salah is something from that perspective which is regular and is habitual. But it's important that we don't let salah fall into that category in our lives, because it's far more significant. We have to, and this is one way to solve it. Well, one thing you can do is remind yourself of, before you go into the salah, what you're about to engage in, its importance, its significance, the weight it holds on the Day of Judgment, the weight it holds in a Muslim's life. Remind yourself that this is a connection with Allah. SubhanAllah, this is a direct connection with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. And I think about this. I was thinking about this the other day. The Prophet ﷺ referred to the salah as the mi'raj of the believer, the ascension of the believer. Now, the mi'raj that the Prophet ﷺ went on was, he actually left this place, this earth, this material existence, this world, and he ascended into heaven. So much so that he was extremely close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the mi'raj is something significant. It was a significant event in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and the fact that the Prophet ﷺ has said or referred to the salah as a mi'raj for the believer is something significant. It's an ascension for the believer. And as we know, the salah is, especially in prostration, is when you're closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just thinking about this, I mean, we should really compare that to the state of our salah. Do we feel like that we're really close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're praying? That we're connecting with Allah, we're speaking to Allah, Allah is responding to us. As we know, when you read the Fatiha, Allah responds after each ayah when you recite the Fatiha. Are we feeling that connection? And a lot of that is down to where your heart and mind is in the salah. Are you focused? Have you realized the significance of what you're engaging in? Have you managed to try to shut out all external distractions and worries and concerns for those 5-10 minutes? That's something we need to think about. And finally, you see all of these people these days engaging in yoga and spiritual practices and meditation and all of this type of stuff, just to escape, have a few moments of peace, a few moments of contemplation. Man, we've got the best. We've not only got something that gives you, a space in which you can go and just focus and contemplate, but we've been blessed with an act, that allows us to connect to our Creator, connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speak to Allah, engage with Allah. yet we're not making the most of it. We're seeing it as just ritualistic thing, this sort of thing we do every day. That's problematic, you know. So we have to really put things into perspective, I guess, to attain that concentration. Another thing we should try to do is try to learn the meaning of the salah. You know, at least learn the vocabulary of the salah. So learn the vocabulary of Surah Al-Fatiha. You know, a really good book, I'll show you guys now, a really good resource for this. Sheikh Mustafa Khattab sent me this a few months ago, and I haven't been using as much as I should be, the Clear Quran Dictionary. You know, this basically, you know, and Surah Al-Fatiha is in this dictionary as well. And you can learn the meanings and the depths of each word of Al-Fatiha. And I would say it's important to do this, you know, especially if we're struggling with focusing in a salah, etc. Because if you know what you're reciting, what you're saying, that's inevitably going to make a big difference. And also try to, you know, refresh yourself as to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he mentions or highlights what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when you're reciting Fatiha in response. You know, because if that's there in your mind and you're reading Fatiha in Salah, you're going to be focused. You know, you're going to be focused. SubhanAllah. I mean, think about it. Even when you get some sort of celebrity or a high-profile person in this world, yeah, someone that's, you know, and he has all this protocol and he has these guards, you know. Take someone like royalty, for example, right? Kings and queens and stuff like this. There's a way people address them when they're in their presence, right? When they're in their court, there's a way, there's an other, there's you know, there's certain movements, bodily movements, the way they walk, the way they may bow down, etc. You know, and do you think these people are distracted when they're in front of these people? No, they're fully focused, right? And they are present. But yet we're standing in front of Allah 5 times a day, and we don't seem to have not even half that type of awareness and concentration and presence in the salah. So there's some things to think about, inshallah. It's you know, it's going to be a work in progress for all of us. And remember, shaitan is always there, and you know, a Muslim engaging in salah is something that probably really irritates him. So he's going to be on your case anyway. So it's very important to try and sort of make it the best you can, because it has a direct impact on what happens after the salah. Once you try to engage in it with proper concentration and khushu and awareness of Allah, you'll notice the next couple of hours up to the next salah are different. You know, you're present, inshallah. So why do secularists always make moral claims against religion, while they cannot ground morals in any objective way? I think, firstly, because they don't realize they can't ground morals in any objective way. And this again goes back to the point of the fitrah and human nature. You know, you will find good atheists, good secularists who believe in doing good and staying and avoiding bad and harming people, etc. And I think one of the reasons they lash out against religion, aside from the fact that they're misinformed and they haven't understood what Islam is saying, is that they are human beings who have a moral compass. So they feel the need to speak out based on their misunderstanding, that is. So that's one of the reasons. I don't think it's fallacious in most cases, because I think in most cases, when you really pin it down and get them to realize that on secularism and atheism, this moral sentiment of yours can't be grounded, has no basis. It really puts them on the back foot and gets them to think about their secularism or their atheism. So yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons. I don't think they realize that the worldview they adopt strips them from the ability to make sense of moral values and duties. So question, if we go to paradise by Allah's mercy, then what's the point of doing good deeds? Please answer this, it's making me crazy. Yeah, Said, look, the simplest explanation to this is we have to realize, you know, you have to see it like this. One way you can see is this: what brings about Allah's mercy, right? What's going to bring about Allah's mercy, which which will be the ultimate means to attaining paradise. It's good deeds. That's what Allah has told us to do. Because Allah has told us, believe and do good deeds. So when you believe and do good deeds, you're doing what Allah has told you to do. And when you do what Allah has told you to do, then you're earning the favor of Allah. You're bringing up upon yourself the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's a beautiful link between good deeds and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So hopefully that addresses the question. It's nothing to worry about, bro. It's very simple. It's just see the link between the two, inshallah. So Southern Mystic says, turning inwards to answer the most important questions of life. He says, yeah, okay. So, and he says, Imran's response, turning inwards is the same as thinking that you are a God. No, I think that's a bit of a caricature of what I may have said in previous live streams, and a bit of context as well. If you mean by turning inwards to seek answers to questions and to reflect, that's a good thing, to reflect within oneself. But if you turn inwards and allow or make it a means for self-deification, then that's problematic. So hopefully that clarifies that for you, bro. Can you explain proper tawakkul? I'm confused about having trust in Allah and then doing what is in my ability. Is it not conflicting? No. So tawakkul is relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, put your trust in Allah. Tawakkul doesn't mean that you sit on your backside and therefore do nothing, right? Remember, when you engage in this world, that's by the leave of Allah, that's by the power of Allah. When you find means in your path, things to help you, and you take hold of those means are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those means in and of themselves have no power, right? And Allah created us as beings who are living through time and have free will, so we have to act. So that is not in conflict with putting your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why the correct perspective is put your trust in Allah, ask Allah, rely upon Allah, and then do whatever you can. Because that trust in Allah is going to manifest probably in the way that Allah opens up means for you in this world. And if you don't take them, then you're not taking what Allah's putting in your way, right? So you actually, how can I put this without sounding too... if you don't do that, if you don't take hold of the means and the blessings Allah puts in your way after putting your trust in Him, that's actually slapping your tawakkul in Allah in the face, in a way. Because, I mean, Allah, if we were just to sit there, Allah could have created us as melons, right, with a brain. But Allah gave us the ability to function in this world and do what we can. And we see beautiful examples of this in the Quran. Maryam alayhi salam, when she's sitting beneath the palm tree, she has to shake the trunk of the tree for the dates to fall on her. She's put her trust in Allah completely. Her tawakkul is probably far greater than our tawakkul is ever going to be. Yet she understood that tawakkul in Allah doesn't mean sitting there and doing nothing. She had to leave the city and go out to give birth to Isa alayhi salam. So acting is in line with tawakkul. You don't sit there and do nothing. That's not what tawakkul means. You have to tie your camel, as per the narration. You have to do what you can. Put your trust in Allah and do what you can. It's like birds. There's an example of birds in our tradition where they go out in the morning hungry, not knowing where they're going to get food from. But they have trust in Allah. But they go out and they do what they can, and then they receive. So it's about understanding tawakkul properly, inshallah, and that's what it means. Put your trust in Allah, and therefore that means know that Allah will help you, Allah will provide for you, Allah will take you out of the situation, He will make the means, and then go out there and see where Allah's put those means for you. So no one really says, can you please explain how from the atheist point of view they can't account for their rational faculties, the scientific method? Yeah, so look, there's a few ways. You can see this in many different ways. The way I understand it is this, or the way I like to articulate is this. Our rational faculties, we have truth-bearing rational faculties. This is an assumption. We have to assume this to have any discussion, to engage in any sort of inquiry in this world, whether it's scientific or philosophical, etc. So we have to assume that we have truth-bearing rational faculties. Now, from an atheist perspective, they have to put down the development of our rational faculties to biology, to evolution. So they have to make the case that our truth-bearing rational faculties evolved. And the way they have to they can only justify this is if they can prove that truth-bearing rational faculties are advantageous for survival. That's the only way they can do this. But there's a lot of conflicting research. If you look at the literature on our truth-bearing rational faculties, etc., you will see that there are very strong arguments and points made, which I feel are conclusive, that true beliefs as well as false beliefs both can be adequate for survival. I mean, you can survive on false beliefs as well. So therefore, there's no need for the ability or the faculties that lead to true beliefs to form from an evolutionary perspective. It doesn't make any sense. And another way you can look, another point you can add to this is, well, fine, if you peg it to survival alone, well, then you have to be, how do you make sense of our higher rational functioning, such as when we engage in mathematics or the study of the physical world, etc. How do we account for that when that's not needed for survival? It has nothing to do with survival. I mean, cockroaches survive, right? They survive better than humans. They've been surviving for, I think, millions of years or however long. But you don't see cockroaches engaging in discussions about quantum mechanics. They don't do that, but they survive. So there's loads of problems from that perspective. When it comes to the scientific method, see, the point I think we need to appreciate here, the scientific method depends on several things. Two fundamental things it depends on is, number one, a rational mind, a mind that has the ability to understand, to comprehend, to attain truth. And it requires that the world is uniform, that there's uniformity in nature, meaning that uniformity, meaning that there is a consistency within reality, whereby that when we observe reality time and again, it doesn't shift and change drastically. Because if it were to shift and change drastically, there would be no uniformity, and therefore you could not do science, because you would study one thing one day and then the next day it will be totally different. So you always be playing cat and mouse. You'll be chasing something that doesn't exist anymore. So you won't be able to study the world. So you need these things, two things. You need an ordered universe that follows certain laws, that is uniform, and you need a mind that has the ability to understand the universe. And we have both. It's like a lock and key, right? So the lock is this uniform universe, and the key is the rational mind that has the ability to unlock some of the secrets of this physical universe. That in itself, I mean, I don't know how an atheist is going to unpack this and try to explain this from a purely, evolutionary perspective. And they've tried, and I've seen some very bad attempts. So that's how I would sort of summarize those 2 points, inshallah. Okay. Okay, fine. So Ahmed says, explain the Islamic thought on free will. I'll give you a simple sort of summary of it. I don't know how much detail. I don't think it's the time and place to go into too much detail here, but we know Allah has given us free will, and we can exercise our free will in this world. And that's it. That's free will. We can choose between right and wrong. We can choose to do what we want to do. However, this is in relation with the fact that Allah knows everything and has determined everything. And this is the bigger question of free will and determination. Now, one of the things I always like to highlight before I sort of try to give an explanation of this, which I don't think we need to, and I'll explain why in a second, but is that the question or the paradox, if you like, of free will and determination is not a problem of Islam. It's a general philosophical issue, whether you're an atheist or a secularist, whoever you are, whatever worldview you follow. This is something that's heavily debated still, amongst non-believers as well, about free will and predetermination. They can't understand it. They just, you have camps, right? Some say free will, some say predetermination, some try to make the bridge between the two. So it's a problem for people, humans in general. Now, what this highlights, for me at least, is that this highlights, or this shows that we as human beings are limited. We have limits, and it's something we need to appreciate as human beings, especially as Muslims, that we have limits. We're not God, we are humans. Our rational faculties, therefore, too, have their limits, right? So there's things that are going to be beyond us. There's things that we just can't understand. We don't have the capacity or ability to understand. And this is one of those things that, Allah has determined everything. Allah knows everything. He's all knowing. But we have free will. These are two, and remember, you can't merge these two realms if you haven't experienced both realms. And we can never experience the realm of Allah, because Allah is Allah, we are humans, we are creation, and that He is the creator. And we know that the creator is completely different from His creation. It's unlike His creation in every way, shape, or form. Therefore, it's something that we would never fully be able to grasp, but we don't have to. We don't have to. As long as we know the source that we're receiving our information from, that is sufficient. If Allah says we have free will, then we have that ability to make choice, to choose between right and wrong, and we are accountable for this. How these two realms merge, Allah knows best. How the realm, the fact that Allah knows everything, has determined everything, how that overlaps or merges with our reality, as human beings, Allah knows best. We're limited because we're humans that experience serial time. We're bound by it. We're moving through it, and therefore that's it. That's we everything about us, including our rational faculties, our ability to ponder and reflect, is limited by these things, and that's where we stop. So and I think there's a level of humility here that needs, that we need to mention. Which is a characteristic of the believer, that we just don't know everything. Allah knows best, and therefore we rely upon Allah. And there are some cases, absolutely, where we hear and we obey. We put our trust in Allah. But all of this obedience, submission, is pegged upon the understanding of who Allah is. Once you know Allah exists and that He is all knowing and all powerful and able to do all things and the all wise, that is sufficient. That is what we need to know. Once we know this, then we submit. And submission means that we submit wholly, including our rational faculties. That's not to say that there aren't many things or majority of the things in the Quran or in Islam that we can't understand. We can understand many of those things. We can articulate many of the reasons behind those things, the wisdoms behind those things. But there are some things which are just beyond us, and for me, whenever I come across those things, it's a moment of, okay, relax a bit. You're a human at the end of the day, and you don't have the ability to understand everything. But at that point, you rely upon Allah and you submit to Him and you do what He's told you to do. So yeah, that's how I would address. I know I sort of elaborated upon it, but inshallah that helps. Yeah, I'm doing Q&A right now, free Quran translation. This is live. HHH says, do you play video games? I personally don't. I'm just not into video games, to be very honest. Okay, someone's asked about contingency argument. Okay, I do mean to do a whole, inshallah, video on the contingency. What I'll do is I'll go through Hamza's divine reality once again, just as a refresher, because I haven't gone through the argument for a while. And then I'll do a video on that, inshallah, specifically on the contingency argument. It is a very powerful argument. The essence of the argument is that, things are either dependent or independent and necessary, right? Now, when we look at the things in the world and the things in the universe, things within creation, we recognize that they are dependent, and dependent things have certain characteristics. For example, one of them is that they have limited physical qualities, right? Another is that they can be rearranged in different ways. Another is that, and if they could be rearranged in different ways, then why are they arranged in a particular way? That shows dependency. So you get the gist of it. Now, if they are dependent, then they have to be dependent on something. Okay. Now, the thing they're dependent upon can be either independent or necessary. when we look at the things in the world, when you see what they, if you look at the direct causal chain, then they're dependent on most things are dependent on other things, which are also dependent. And inevitably, you get to the point where everything that is dependent has to be dependent upon something independent and necessary, right? So you otherwise you have an infinite regress. There has to be that independent and necessary being at the end of the chain, and that is who we refer to as Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. That's the sort of gist of it. But I will do a detailed video on this because there are some, contentions that Hamza highlights, etc., and we could deal with those then, inshallah. See how long we're going for now. Okay, we'll do like 3 more questions, and we wrap up, inshallah. Okay, let's see. So Psalm 21 says, I am in high school and I'm quite new to learning Islamic knowledge. Can you please make a dedicated video on how to learn? Uh, yeah, I'll do something on it, inshallah. But we have a brilliant um, course on the IRA channel for new Muslims. I know you're not maybe a new Muslim, but I think the content and the knowledge that's covered there would apply to Muslims that are learning about Islam for the very first time or new to Islamic thought, because it covers all of the basics. It's a step-by-step course. I think it's available online, so you guys can definitely check that out. And by the way, there's a step-by-step course that's on every Thursdays for new Muslims. So if there's any new Muslims, you can join that too. If you go to the IRA website, you can find details for that there, inshallah. Ameen to Ibrahim Khan. Let's see how. Okay, so I think we've had a similar question before. How much learning of Islam did you do, and to what level before you felt safe to study nihilism and other Western ideologies? I think we had the same question last time, but just to summarize it again, it wasn't a choice for me to study nihilism at a particular time in my studies. It was just because I experienced it firsthand for myself, and that's why I had to deal with it very early on, even before I knew much about Islam myself. So hopefully that addresses that particular question, inshallah. I've answered it in more detail in the previous live stream, inshallah. Let's see, I'm just going to flip through. So A says, what have you studied and are studying? Um, I'll give you a general sort of, me personally, so I'm currently doing my master's in Islamic studies. Um, I'm also, so most of my studies haven't been formal, as far as Islamic studies are concerned, or even studies in whatever I've looked into as far as philosophy and existentialism. It's been, much of it's been self-study, and much of it's been um, learning through brothers in the field. Um, and so individuals like Sheikh Fahad have really benefited from a lot. Sheikh Mustafa Khattab, Hamza, without doubt, as far as philosophy and argumentation and other things are concerned as well. Um, Adnan Rashid, mashallah, these, just to be able to, just having the ability to, or having the opportunity to spend time with these people, really, you learn a lot from being around them. And then I've had some teachers here and there, where I've studied bits and pieces from, but nothing, no like specific curriculum, to be very honest. Um, And a lot of, so as far as the answers, so for example, the answers that I give you guys sometimes in regards to dawah related questions, a lot of that has come through just experience. So being involved in the dawah, engaging with people, being asked questions I haven't been able to understand, and going back to the drawing board, looking it up, researching it, speaking to people with knowledge, um, and then thinking about it myself, and then just formulating or coming up with questions with answers. So experience is a very big teacher, brothers and sisters. But that being said, if you're looking for Islamic knowledge, I would really recommend doing some basic courses, like maybe a course on Aqidah, going through a tafsir course, so studying the tafsir of the Quran. And there's many resources online. I mean, Bayana has a brilliant program of this. Many other institutions provide really nice courses on Islam, etc. For the Dawah, if you guys are looking for something, then there's a brilliant free course on the IRA website, training.ira.org. So there's loads of resources to learn these days. It's just a case of making the time to, study. That's the key thing. We live in blessed times, honestly. If anything, there's information overload these days. You have too much, and you have to, be careful with where you go for your information. Okay. Allah can create you in a Muslim and a Muslim family in countries of Pakistan. It's a very nice point by Poor Boy. Just convey the message, inshallah. Very, very important. Shaz Khan says, does Islam condemn self-love? I don't know. It depends what you mean by self-love. Yeah, I mean, everyone loves themselves to a degree. But if self-love, I guess, reaches the level where you love yourself more than, this reminds me of the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, if you were the companion, I don't remember who it was, but came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he asked, essentially the Prophet told him, until you love Allah and His Messenger more than you love even yourself, till then, you're not there. So as long as self-love doesn't go beyond certain levels, and what's my screen, subhanAllah. So as long as self-love doesn't go beyond certain levels, and it's not something that is almost, it turns into something where you're sort of self-deifying, you're almost worshipping yourself. That's where it's problematic. But I think on a sort of base level, everyone has a love for themselves, and that's what we're concerned about ourselves. And I think it's important, because if you weren't, then you will be in trouble. So you have to love yourself to a degree. Yeah, I think Imam al-Ghazali, he has a, he mentions something about when you love if you love yourself, then you must love Allah, because He is the one that created you and placed that within you. So how could you not love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Okay, so let's take one more question, inshallah. So let's take this one. I think this is the question. We'll take this as the last one, inshallah. So how you dealt with doubts and confusion mind in confusion in the past, when you also have pressure of academics or job. So if you have pressure of basic academia or jobs to deal with, this is a good question. I think everyone has pressure, right? Some pressure or the other throughout their life. You will have situations that come up, and it can make it more difficult. I don't think it results in doubts necessarily, unless you have a unless you sort of have a distorted understanding of the tests and trials in life and why we go through them. But if you find yourself in a situation where you have certain doubts and at the same time you have a lot of pressure and a lot of things going on, it can make it harder to try to figure things out. But try to separate those two things. And when it comes to doubts, the way I always put it is you have to first recognize, understand doubts. Sometimes you don't really have doubts. What you have are questions which you have labeled as doubts. Okay? So, and that's problematic because doubts are something quite negative. Question is something which is positive. Now, as soon as you call a question or label a question a doubt in your mind, eventually it becomes that. So you have to be careful there. But if you genuinely have, you're going, and if you have questions, well, first label them correctly, call it a question, and then look for answers. Make a note of it somewhere so it's not continuously in your mind and bothering you. Just make a note of it somewhere and then just look for answers for that question. Speak to someone of knowledge. If you're stuck dealing with doubts, then, really, and they're not just questions, they're actually doubts, then they can either be, as a form of waswas, or they can be something that stem from you engaging in, sins and disobeying Allah, etc. Now, if it's waswas, then the best advice I can give you is realize what waswas is and don't give it any more power. Meaning, don't bring it to your focal point right in the middle of your focus and just think about it. Because the more you think about it, the more it'll drain you, and the more it'll play in your mind, and the more it'll lead to anxiety and frustration, etc. It's whispers. They're there. Everyone has them. Just let it be, right? And don't give it any power. Don't try to push it out, because when you're trying to push it out, you're thinking about what you're pushing out. But just let it be. It's okay. It's there. Khalas. I believe in Allah. I believe in His Messenger, and you carry on. And what you'll notice is, if you accept it like that, meaning you're not pushing it out, but you're not focusing on it either. It's there. You accept it. You'll see it. No, it'll fade away over time. If it's because of, you have to identify the reasons for the doubts appearing. If it's because you've been falling into sins, and now you're in this sort of situation where on one hand you have your Islam, and the other hand you have things that you're engaging in that you like doing, which are wrong and they're wrong, then it puts you in a state of tension internally, mentally. People don't like to be in a state of tension. And in such a situation, the human being is going to look for a resolution. Now, there's one or two things you could do in that situation. Either you can give in to your, the right thing to do is to slowly battle your sins and the things you're engaging in and overcome them and start to move towards doing what's right. And then you'll be at peace. Or the easier thing to do, unfortunately, what most people fall into, is to disassociate yourself from Islam. So when you're engaging in your sins, you don't feel guilty. That's what people end up doing. And to do this, we have to have a reason to disassociate from Islam. And what ends up happening is that you start producing doubts. Right? You may not even realize you're doing this. You start producing ideas and thoughts which help you disassociate from Islam. And that could be quite, detrimental. So, but the key thing is realize if this is what you're doing, and then to try to fix that situation. And as long as you're trying to move in the right direction and you're putting in the effort and you're trying to avoid those sins and trying to better yourself, that's what matters at the end of the day. You're seeking forgiveness from Allah. Allah is the most forgiving, the most merciful. So that's how I sort of deal with that topic of doubts. All right, guys, we'll wrap up inshallah for today. May Allah bless you guys. We'll do another live Q&A some point later this week, inshallah. And I'll speak to you guys then. May Allah bless you guys. Assalamu alaikum.